The United States Supreme Court has delivered a landmark ruling, one that will be remembered as a turning point in the nation's economic history. In a sweeping decision, the court has dismantled the legal framework behind the Trump-era tariffs, effectively overturning years of controversial trade barriers. This decision marks a dramatic shift in American trade policy, ending years of aggressive protectionism and heated trade disputes that have shaped the global economic landscape. The ruling rebalances power between the executive and legislative branches, forcing a nationwide reassessment of how the U.S. approaches international commerce and the rules that govern it. For businesses and consumers, the implications are immediate. A move toward a more predictable, rules-based global trading system that promises greater stability and opportunity for growth. International partners, long frustrated by the tariffs, now see an opening for renewed negotiations and the rebuilding of multilateral trade frameworks that had been weakened in recent years. The tariffs had strained relationships with allies, creating rifts that affected not just trade, but also diplomatic cooperation on broader issues. They also escalated tensions with rivals like China, fueling a trade war that rippled through global supply chains and impacted economies worldwide. Now, American industries that benefited from protectionism face renewed competition from abroad, challenging them to innovate and adapt. Meanwhile, those hurt by retaliatory tariffs, such as farmers and small manufacturers, may finally see relief and new opportunities to expand into foreign markets. The transition won't be seamless. Policymakers must carefully manage the shift away from tariffs, balancing the interests of various industries and ensuring a smooth adjustment for the economy as a whole. This Supreme Court decision sets the stage for a dramatic recalibration of U.S. trade relations in a deeply interconnected world, where cooperation and competition go hand in hand. The global economy is watching closely as the U.S. redefines its role, with markets and investors reacting to every development. A new era for global trade has begun, filled with both challenges and opportunities for nations and businesses around the world. The Trump administration's tariffs were built on two key legal tools: Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, a law originally designed to protect the nation's security interests through trade policy, and Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974, which was crafted to address unfair foreign trade practices and ensure a level playing field for American businesses. Section 232 allowed the president to impose tariffs for national security reasons, giving the executive branch significant discretion in determining what constituted a threat. Over time, the definition of national security was stretched, expanding beyond traditional defense concerns to include broader economic issues, such as the health of key industries. This interpretation led to sweeping tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, impacting not only rivals but also close U.S. allies like Canada and the European Union. Retaliation from affected countries was swift. Iconic American exports like motorcycles faced new tariffs overseas, hurting U.S. manufacturers. American bourbon, a symbol of U.S. culture and industry, was also targeted in response, with tariffs imposed by trading partners. Section 301, meanwhile, empowered the U.S. Trade Representative to investigate and respond to unfair foreign trade practices, including intellectual property violations. The main focus became China, accused of widespread intellectual property theft and forced technology transfers from American companies operating there. The result was a full-blown trade war, with hundreds of billions of dollars in tariffs exchanged between the world's two largest economies, disrupting global supply chains. These statutes gave the executive branch unprecedented power to reshape U.S. trade policy, effectively bypassing Congress's traditional oversight and legislative role. Critics argued that this concentration of power in the executive overstepped constitutional boundaries, setting the stage for a major legal battle that would ultimately reach the Supreme Court. The core question before the court was whether Congress truly intended to grant the president such sweeping authority over trade, or if these actions went too far. The answer would have far-reaching consequences, not just for trade but for the fundamental separation of powers within the U.S. government. The stage was set for a historic legal showdown, with the eyes of the nation and the world watching closely. The future of U.S. trade law and the balance of power between Congress and the president now hung in the balance. The Supreme Court case began with American businesses and importers challenging the president's authority to impose sweeping tariffs. Their argument, only Congress has the constitutional power to regulate foreign commerce, and the president's use of Section 232 lacked clear limits. The legal debate centered on the non-delegation doctrine. Congress can't hand over its powers without clear guidance. The government countered that Congress had provided enough direction and that the president was simply executing the law. The case became a test of the separation of powers and the limits of presidential authority in trade. The outcome would redefine the boundaries of executive power in the 21st century. In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that the president's use of Section 232 to impose broad tariffs was unconstitutional. The majority opinion revived the non-delegation doctrine, insisting Congress must provide clear limits when delegating power. The court found that national security had been interpreted so broadly it lost meaning as a legal constraint. The ruling distinguished between targeted defense measures and blanket economic protectionism, reaffirming Congress's primary role in trade policy. While the decision focused on Section 232, it cast doubt on other broad delegations of trade authority. The dissent warned of judicial overreach, but the majority's message was clear. Congress, not the president, must set the rules for trade. The constitutional lines had been redrawn. The Trump-era tariffs triggered a global chain reaction, sending shockwaves through the interconnected world economy. The European Union, Canada, and Mexico quickly retaliated with tariffs on iconic American goods, such as motorcycles and whiskey, disrupting deeply integrated supply chains that had taken decades to build. Each new tariff added layers of costs and complexity, forcing businesses to navigate a maze of regulations and paperwork, and ultimately hurting their global competitiveness. The trade war with China forced many companies to shift production to countries like Vietnam and Mexico, a costly and time-consuming process known as trade diversion, which upended established business models. As a result, global trade growth slowed noticeably, and the uncertainty discouraged much-needed investment in new projects and infrastructure. The IMF estimated that the US-China trade tensions would shave nearly 1% off global GDP by 2020, a significant blow to worldwide economic progress. The US bypassed the World Trade Organization, undermining the rules-based order it had helped create, and casting doubt on the future of multilateral trade agreements. Other countries began to consider similar unilateral actions, raising fears of a return to 1930s-style protectionism and economic fragmentation. The tariffs corroded not just trade flows, but also the very institutions and relationships that underpin global economic cooperation and trust. The world watched closely as the US set a precedent for go-it-alone trade policy, wondering what the long-term consequences might be. The Supreme Court's decision now offers a rare chance to restore trust, stability, and predictability to the global trading system. Today, the global trading system stands at a crossroads, facing a pivotal moment that will determine its future direction. The next moves by world leaders and policymakers will shape the future of international commerce for years to come, influencing prosperity and cooperation worldwide. At home, the tariffs created clear winners and losers. US steel and aluminum producers saw short-term gains, but manufacturers faced higher costs, passing them on to consumers. Studies showed the tariffs acted as a regressive tax, hitting lower-income households hardest. Retaliatory tariffs devastated American agriculture, especially exports to China, forcing the government to bail out farmers. The overall trade deficit didn't shrink, and manufacturing job losses outweighed gains in protected sectors. The tariffs failed to deliver their promised economic benefits. Instead, they left a legacy of disruption, higher prices, and concentrated pain. The Supreme Court's ruling brings hope for relief, but the scars remain. Before the tariffs, US trade was driven by efficiency and established supply chains, especially with North American partners. The tariffs disrupted these flows, causing shortages and price spikes as imports from targeted countries fell. Trade was diverted to non-tariffed countries, but the overall deficit kept growing. The trade war with China led companies to shift assembly to Vietnam and Mexico, but this didn't bring manufacturing back to the US. It just reshuffled supply chains. The result: inefficiency, higher costs, and little progress on the administration's goals. With the tariffs now void, trade patterns will shift again. Some old links will be restored, but supply chain diversification is here to stay. Companies have invested in new facilities abroad and won't reverse course overnight. The post-tariff era will blend restored trade with a new focus on resilience and diversity. The legacy of disruption will shape US trade for years to come. Economists and industry leaders largely welcomed the Supreme Court's decision, calling it a return to economic sanity. Decades of research confirm that broad tariffs raise prices and hurt competitiveness. Retailers and farmers, hit hard by the trade war, celebrated the ruling as a chance to rebuild export markets and lower costs for families. However, domestic steel producers warned of renewed foreign competition and vowed to lobby Congress for targeted protections. Early economic forecasts predict a modest boost to GDP and easing inflation, but warn the transition will be disruptive. Unwinding tariffs is complex, supply chains have changed and uncertainty remains. The consensus cautious optimism for the broader economy, but concern for industries losing protection. The debate over trade policy is far from over. The ruling is a turning point, but the path forward will be contested. The U.S. must balance open markets with strategic safeguards. The world is watching how America adapts. The Supreme Court's decision ends a disruptive era, but the work of unwinding tariffs is just beginning. The administration faces a massive task refunding duties, updating regulations, and guiding businesses through the transition. Congress must now decide whether to reclaim its trade authority or set new, clearer limits for the executive branch. Internationally, the U.S. has a chance to rebuild alliances and lead on global trade reform. The ruling confirms what the data showed. Tariffs mostly hurt American consumers and producers. The path forward involves administrative overhaul, legislative debate, and renewed diplomacy. The tariff era is over, but its lessons will shape policy for years. The central question: will policymakers learn from this experiment or repeat its mistakes?